I think. Ooh.
Okay, let me call to order the, oh my goodness, that thing is loud. Can you hear me? Oh, good golly. Let me call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency for today, Wednesday, September 23rd. If you'll please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Charlotte, who will lead us?
Sure. Please place your hand over your heart and join me in the pledge to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Chair Mulhart?
Here.
Director Craven?
Here.
Director Bennett?
Here.
Director West?
Here.
Director Borchert?
Here. Okay, and I see Andy Waters, Bob Aranio. Those are the only two alternates I see in the audience. Okay. Jeff, agenda review.
A couple of big things. You'll see, we're going to ask that your board pull the executive officer's report up to the front of the agenda, maybe just after the consent items. In it, there's a presentation by Matthew Feenup, who's with us today, about water markets around the world. And I should say that's just to give your board some idea about water markets. It's not to talk about water markets in the GMA or any of that. It's just, here's what other people are doing, sort of an informational report. So I'd like, if with your permission, to get him out of here earlier, I'd like to pull that up to just before item 4. Now, also, we had some problems with the process in developing the board letters for items 7 through 10. So those are not ready for your board's consumption yet. They'll have to wait until the next meeting, so we're asking that those items be pulled.
Okay. We'll move item G to the top.
The revised agenda.
Okay.
By staff.
All right. A motion to do that. Before I do that, before we call for the vote on it, this is the second month now that we've dealt with sustainability plan development, and I'm wondering if maybe we ought to have you take the time, go back and do a review of the process. What procedurally or process-wise or structure-wise, what can we do, changes that we may have to make or should make to the process so that we're not going through constant delays on this issue. We've got a very aggressive timetable, I get that. What can we do now that we've had 2 months of doing this process, and both have really resulted in some form of delay, either for whatever reasons. So I would ask that by the next board meeting, present to us your ideas, revised plan on a revised process, what you think it's going to take for us to push this ball down the road and meet our timeline. And it'll include structural changes, policy changes, I don't know, a whole laundry list. I think we need to hear from you on that. Okay?
We can do that.
Okay. So I have a motion to amend the agenda. Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Al, can I do that with just voice consensus, or we have to have a roll call?
Voice vote.
Okay. Anybody object? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Okay. So the first item on the agenda then will be public comments. Anybody have some items they want to talk about that are not on the agenda? Andy.
Bring you something that's it's very legit and a good piece of work. So.
You think you might be able to make that presentation next month?
Absolutely.
Okay, so coordinate with staff. Let's make so that it's part of the process of moving this along. Let's deal with that issue, and so we can all weigh in or learn or whatever we need to do.
Shoot holes in it. That'd be great.
What's that?
Shoot holes in it. That'd be great. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Anybody else? Yeah.
Just clarification.
It's not. Oh, yeah, it's on.
Keeps going off. You'll make a presentation. We won't necessarily vote on it.
That's right, yeah.
It's not a it's the initial presentation, right? Great, thanks.
Okay, but work with staff to get it on the agenda. Let's have that one on the agenda. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, board member comments? Any comments from board members? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I have something, and it may seem really radical, but I'd like to talk about it, and it's because, not now, but I'd like to ask for an agenda item. We have a lot coming before us, and we really need to get going. That year is passing, although maybe it hasn't started yet, I'm not sure. But at any rate, I think that we are probably the only or one of the very, very few government agencies in the county and probably in the state that doesn't have a time limit for people to talk. And I would like to talk about a policy as an agenda item to limit public comments on any item to maybe 5 minutes, or whatever the board should decide, and how many times anybody could talk on one. I think that as we grow and become the sustainability board, we're going to have to start acting more like, less like a town meeting and more like a government agency, and that's part of it, I think.
Okay. Jeff, can you make an agenda item around that issue so the board can weigh in?
We can.
And the town hall public can weigh in at the
Now,
same time?
everybody can weigh in. I'd just like to have it as an agenda item.
Yeah.
We'll
okay.
put it on October.
Okay, anybody else?
You know, as we've discussed many times, both for basin management as well as for sustainability planning, pumping reports are essential. And I'd like to see the board get an opportunity to discuss the remedies that are available to the board or to the agency for noncompliance. Not necessarily for failing to submit accurate pumping reports. That'll be a different issue that hopefully we'll tackle some other way, some other time. But I'm talking about the failure to submit pumping reports. There are some repeat offenders who repeat and don't report for years. And it seemed to me that the remedies that are available to this agency for that kind of noncompliance are really inadequate. And I think that's something I'd like to take up. I'd be interested in whatever staff recommendations might be or what the public's feelings might be, but I think that's something that we should discuss and address.
Okay. Jeff, you've heard that?
My comment is just about these comments that have come in. I think that I very much would like to have that conversation, like to have your conversation too. I just want to make sure that we look at October and we you know, if.
I'm not specific about when.
Yeah, exactly. That we look at October, I'm fine if they all happen in October, if it looks like it works for our agenda, but I just would be
We
willing.
need the
that when we-
important things
Yeah, when
first.
we do agenda review, we may say, it's a good topic, can we just push it off a month or two or whatever? But I just want to get that out there in terms of, I don't know where we are and everything that we have to get done. Thanks.
Okay, good. Dave, you want to weigh in on any of these?
I have nothing to say about that.
Okay. All right. Any other board comments? All right, very good. Let's go to the consent agenda. We have 3 items. A motion, please.
Move the approval.
A motion to approve, a second? Second. Okay, this one we'll do with a roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchert?
Yes.
Okay, Matt, we're going to slide your presentation up at this point in time. Okay.
Thanks for having me. For those in the room that don't know me, I have a dual affiliation here today. I am an economist at the Center for Economic Research and Forecasting at California Lutheran University, and I am also a PhD candidate at the Bren School of Environmental Science at UC Santa Barbara. My research looks at land use policies and water policies. There we go. All right, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the prevalence of water markets as a way of managing this scarce resource, and just highlight the fact that there's a menu of different options available, and argue that this is a really effective way of managing this resource. So the premise of water markets is that individual water users are the best equipped to actually assign value to different uses and to move water between low-valued uses and high-valued uses. And at the center of this argument is this notion that there's a big difference between a drought and a water shortage. So right now in California, we're confronted with a drought. We've had historically low precipitation now for going on the 4th year. But that is not what ails aquifers in Ventura County or the Central Valley. What ails those aquifers is a water shortage. A water shortage, by water shortage I mean an imbalance between the supply of water and the demand of water. And so markets are in a really effective way. They provide incentives that coordinate the supply of water and demand of water. That is to say, they bring down the demand for water when the supply of water diminishes, and do this in a very powerful way. So I want to talk first about the most highly developed example of water markets that I'm able to find in the world. That's in Australia, and I know that these have covered a lot of press attention in the last year. And then I just want to use that as the basis for this is what a fully developed, sophisticated water market looks like. And then I want to go through and highlight the examples of water markets in the United States and in California. And I think some people may be surprised to learn that there are currently 18 functioning water markets in California alone. So in Australia, they actually suffered a 15-year-long drought. It was an order of magnitude worse than the one that we're suffering now. And fortunately, they implemented fundamental changes to the way they managed water in the decade leading up to that drought. And amazingly, 1 year before the drought began, they actually separated the ownership of water from the ownership of land. And that fundamental change alone uniquely equipped the country to absorb the impacts of that drought. I think it's an interesting case for California because in many ways economically, they're very similar to us, and even geographically in terms of the amount and the variability of water that falls. So the area of the country that I'll be referring to is the Murray-Darling Basin, southeastern Australia. It has an agricultural economy approximately the size of the San Joaquin Valley here in California. And again, this is the location of some of the most highly developed water markets in the world. So I want to back up and first talk about how water was managed in the 70s and early 80s in Australia. And it's instructive because prior to 1980, Australia managed water just like California does now. Principally, the ownership of water was tied to land and could only be transferred through sale of title to the land. So they managed it, as an academic we would say, they managed it as a common pool resource, right? So they targeted specific outcomes for the aquifer at large and then just allocated water from year to year between users to try and achieve those goals. So as in California in the 1970s, if you had land that had a stream flowing through it or you had a land that had an aquifer underneath it, you were allowed to just put a straw in the ground and pump water for your reasonable and beneficial use. Farmers were able to turn that water to their economic benefit and then sell that produce on open markets, shipping those products outside of their region and in many cases outside of the country. But prior to 1980 in Australia, you were not allowed to actually ship your water directly. So again, if you were a farmer, you could turn that water, as much of that water as you could, into produce, pack produce on tanker ships and semi-trailers and move that water around as long as it was packaged as produce. Right? So in 1980, they did something really unique, which is that they actually allowed leasing of water underneath the existing allocation system. So if you were allocated 100 acre-feet for a ranch in a given year, if you used 80, you could lease that additional 20 acres. And so this was the start of creating flexibility for growers. It also created incentives for water conservation so that farmers literally had a financial incentive to implement best practices to reduce groundwater pumping. Now, common pool management of this type obviously works well as long as the rains come and the aquifers refill. Let's see if I can change the slide, pardon me. All right. But the problem is they still had the underlying common pool problem, right? Which is to say that in a time of severe drought, when water levels in aquifers are dropping, if all you're able to do is turn water into economic benefit by growing things, right? Your rational economic incentive, if you know water levels are declining, is to race to the bottom of the aquifer and extract as much water as you can for economic benefit before it's gone. And so even with a certain amount of leasing underneath allocations, there was still this common pool problem that afflicts resources of this type. So in 1994, Australia engaged in something pretty radical, which is that they took all of the existing land titles and they actually issued a separate title to water so that water was owned separately from the land. And so they unbundled water rights from land ownership and then actually allowed those entitlements to be sold. You could permanently transfer water off of land or you could lease water. Yeah.
84 or 94?
94.
94.
So in the 80s, they initiated a system of voluntary leasing under the allocations. And in 1994, they actually issued title to water.
That was issued at the, and I don't know if their structure has a federal level and a state level. I assume they have something similar. That title was a state title or a county title?
My understanding is this is all done at the federal level. But actually, I can get, I should get a very concrete answer for you, and I can't, and I can.
They were 3 years into the 15-year drought?
No, this is the year before the drought began. So 1995 was when the drought set in.
Okay, thanks.
And then that, in 95, that drought went for 15 years?
Yep, to
Okay.
2009. Is there a trick to this, Jessica?
Just hit it on the side.
You know you can't get your PhD unless you have the ability to flip the slides. That's going to be one of the
That's why
requirements.
these things take 6 or 8 years.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Point it at the screen and
Okay.
click it. On the side, no, the one on the side, that one right there. There you go. Good.
All right, so they separated title of water and title of land. Now, what's interesting in Australia is that you had a title to a fixed amount of water, okay? And actually, those initial entitlements were based on historical use. And your entitlement was permanent. However, each year, the National Water Commission issues allocations, which is a percentage of your entitlement. So the amount of the entitlement is fixed over time, but the system that they use in Australia allows regulators to respond to hydrological conditions. So if water levels are declining in aquifers, you might only get 80% of your entitlement. If there's abundant water, you might also get 110% of your allocation in a given year.
And that allocation, you said, was determined by the national
Yep.
government?
Yep.
All right. Thanks.
All right, now, what this shows here is that in some years, in years of abundant water, you might get an allocation equal to your entire entitlement, but during a drought, those allocations were cut significantly. But the system actually gave growers the flexibility at that point, as cuts were being implemented, to decide whether they wanted to continue to produce agriculture using all of their allocation, or to lease or sell part or all of that allocation in a given year. And in fact, what we see is first that 63% of farmers actually engaged in trading of water allocations during the driest years, and that during the 2 driest years of the drought, that there were many farm businesses that did nothing but lease allocations. And then in fact, rice production went to 0 in the driest year of the drought. So low-valued crops were fallowed, and that water was offered to the market for the benefit of cities, for the benefit of growers of higher valued crops, and also, quite remarkably, for the benefit of environmental use. And in fact, 800,000 acre-feet of water was secured for environmental use during the driest years of the drought. And so this is a report that I'll actually be submitting to the agency for your consideration. This is a report by the National Water Commission, but it actually shows the green bars here are total allocations. So you can see that entitlement happened in 1994. So prior to 1994, there was very little water entitlement in the country. And actually, this is just the southern Murray-Darling Basin we're looking at now. In 1995, all of those entitlements were established. And what you can see there is that there was some fluctuation. The reason the green bars are different heights is because this is the actual allocation total allocation that was allotted based on hydrological conditions. In 2010, the drought ended, and you can see those allocations went up really high. The red bars here are the volume of trading in water markets, and red is trades of entitlements. The blue bar at the very end there is where the government went in and actually received permanent transfer of 800,000 acre-feet for environmental use. All right, so the lessons of Australian water markets are that the tension that we see in California between farmers and fish, between farmers and cities, are in many cases the creation of policy. That in Australia, that tension is not inherent in economic activity in any region, and that in fact, in Australia, that tension doesn't exist. In fact, there's a cooperation that happens between growers and cities and between growers and the environment during the driest years of a drought to move water between uses. All right, and so the lesson here is a big one, that not only does it provide economic benefit for all users of water, but it actually creates economic efficiency. And so the National Water Commission estimates that GDP, and this is just in the southern Murray-Darling Basin, so it's actually gross regional product, increased $370 million in 2010 this is direct value added from water trading. All right, so cities were able to limit the impact of the most severe drought restrictions by acquiring water. Environmental needs were met. The government could go and secure allocations of water for the environment. And then lastly, all of this really supported agricultural productivity. In fact, in a post-drought survey, 90% of farmers surveyed reported that water trading supported the viability of their businesses through the drought, even though just 63% participated in trading during those driest years. All right, it also means that the price of water has to go up. So what we see in Australia is exactly what we would see in a functioning water market. We would actually expect that the price of water would be high when water is scarce, and it would be low when water is abundant, just like we see in gasoline markets, coffee bean, and other commodity markets, and that this is the primary coordinating mechanism that constrains demand when water is especially scarce. Now this, and in fact, in some markets, the price went up by as much as 20-fold from the abundant days of water to the driest days. Now, we might think that this just lives in Australia. In addition to having charming accents, they seem to do all things just a little bit differently than we do. But we see this throughout the United States. So the one that is the most like Australian water markets in the western United States, outside of California, is the Twin Platte Natural Resources District. This is a water market that was created as a result of litigation. So downstream users in the Ogallala Aquifer initiated litigation over upstream users, and a water market was created. And so this is one that allows both leasing and sales of water allocations, and they literally have an online exchange where you can go view offers of water and bids on water and actually secure water for your needs. Now that is a groundwater market. This is a surface water market, the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, and they have a very sophisticated system of moving water between reservoirs through various channels. And so again, here the volume of trading is very high. And I misspoke. This is actually where they have an electronic exchange where you can view bids and offers every day for water. The Twin Platte that I was looking at before is actually an interesting one where there's a trading desk, and offers of water and bids on water are submitted anonymously to a trading desk. When the market closes at the end of the day, the trading desk actually matches bids and offers, and then when the market opens the next morning, contracts are issued for either for the leasing or the permanent transfer of water allocations. And then this one's a really interesting one. So the Oregon Freshwater Trust was a market that was set up really with its primary purpose of securing water for environmental use. Again, this is mostly surface water, but the system that's here is that funds are used to actually basically pay irrigators not to divert water, not to divert stream flows during times of migration of endangered fish species. And so the Oregon Freshwater Trust is cooperating with irrigators, providing financial incentive to reduce surface water diversions during critical times of year. California has one famous and highly developed water market. This is in Kern County, the Kern Water Bank Authority. And the story here is infamous of sorts because you had irrigators, a group of irrigators that secured title to an entire aquifer. So this one operates within existing California law. It didn't require an adjudication or anything else to establish the right. A group of users secured title to an entire aquifer and then literally ceased farming operations on top of it. And so now you had one person owning the entire aquifer, and they went into the water banking business. So they built about $35 million of infrastructure, primarily to connect to the state water project and also to build recharge wells so that water could be deposited in the aquifer that they now owned. And then they went into the banking business. So here, a water user can deliver water through the state water project and other pipelines and deposit water for a fee in the water bank. Once you deposit an acre-foot of water, you own that acre-foot and nobody else can touch it. So when the state comes in and is imposing drought restrictions, you own that acre-foot of water. You can either pump it back out for your use, you can lease or sell it to somebody else, or you can just keep it stored there. And of course, as we would expect, a system like this assigns an asset value to water, and aquifer levels are very, very, very stable in this aquifer. And the price fluctuates just like it does in Australia. So in 2014, I'm told that lease prices went from about $1,000 an acre-foot to $1,600 an acre-foot. I was recently told that almond growers are leasing some water for as much as $2,500 an acre-foot this year to keep long-lived species alive. And it's important to call out here that the Kern Water Bank does have a dual mandate. It is not just not just an economic venture, it's also an environmental venture. So when they retired all of those farms on top of the aquifer, they actually converted that space into what has become a world-class wildlife refuge. And they literally consider that part of their mission, to secure water for the wetlands that overlie the aquifer. So there's one other pretty well-known water market in California, and this is the Scott River Water Trust. This is a surface water market. And again, this is like the Oregon Freshwater Trust, where concerned citizens started a nonprofit organization, and they immediately began paying irrigators in the Scott Valley to withhold diversions of surface water while coho, chinook, and steelhead salmon were migrating. And so they are using this water market to ensure stream flows for fish migrations. Now, those are the two famous California water markets. Some colleagues at UC Santa Barbara and the Bren School recently did a survey of California's 24 adjudicated groundwater basins to try and see what we could learn from those decisions. And to my surprise, what was revealed is that in the 24 adjudicated groundwater basins, of which the Scott River Valley is one, there are 17 functioning water markets in California, not counting the Kern Water Bank Authority. So again, these are the result of court decisions. 10 of these allow leasing and sales of groundwater allocation. So you can lease a unit of water in a given year, or you can permanently transfer title of the water. 6 of them simply allow leasing from year to year. You can't completely sever ownership of water from the land. And then one of them, that's the Scott River Water Trust, allows leasing of surface water. So there's just a menu of different depths of market transactions that are allowed in these 17. And in each case, I would argue that they create additional economic value and in the form of flexibility for all 3 user groups, those being the environment, irrigators, and urban users of water. Now, the biggest challenge in each of these 17, obviously, is establishing the initial allocation of water rights. So what we're talking about here is something on the Australian market. These adjudicated basins have moved from common pool management to a rights-based management system where they first quantify how much water is available, how big is the pie of sustainable yield that can be removed from a basin, and then how big are the pieces that each individual is entitled to. And there's a number of ways to do that. Interestingly, 4 of these 17 used average annual extractions over a certain window of time that was established by the court. 7 of them used maximum annual extraction, so overlying rights holders were literally given their maximum allocation that they had ever used, which means that in those cases, appropriators of water actually had the most severe cuts put on them in order to bring basins into sustainability. 1 of these has equal shares based on acreage, where they just cut the pie based on the number of acres. And then 5 of them, it's not quite clear what they did, except the court statement says it reinforced existing overlying rights. So I would assume there that it's one of the first 2. It was either an average use during a window or maximum extraction. Now, there's one of these that's worth mentioning. The Central Basin in LA County is the most Australian-like of all of these. It actually involves both urban use and agricultural use, and has the freest trading allowed of any of the 17 basins that we're looking at here. All right, so the lessons of California's 18 water markets is, first of all, that we need to break down the use it or lose it system of allocation, the common pool management that we've used for years. The basis for trade is clearly defined exclusive access to a share of water, and that the first step to doing that is separating ownership of water from the ownership of land. And the Sustainable Groundwater Management Agency provides a possible mechanism for doing this. The other lessons of California water markets is that you really have to quantify the rights in a basin, right? None of this, there's nothing to trade unless you decide how much water can sustainably extracted from a basin, and then figure out who has access to how much of that sustainable yield. And then this is just a funny one I threw up there. This is Sari Summerstrom, Executive Director of the Scott River Water Trust. She said the biggest lesson is do all of this locally, right? That local water users really have the local knowledge and can assign value much more accurately to water, and that management is most effectively done at the basin level. All right, and then the other message is the price needs to go up. So in all of these markets, the price is high when water is scarce, and the price is low when water is abundant. All right, and this is a summary table that I'll share with the agency that literally has the duration of the adjudication, the total volume that's adjudicated. You can't, obviously, no one can read what that actually says there. The 4th column is the initial allocation method. The 5th column is the degree of tradability. And then there's also a column there for penalties. So there's a range of penalties. Most of the penalties in water markets for over-extraction are the cost of replenishment, which can run, that's to say importing water from outside the basin. And those penalties are as high as $2,700 an acre foot in some basins. All right, and that's my presentation.
Matt, hold on.
Yeah.
Members, any questions? Yeah.
Certainly, the marketplace and price is generally the best way to allocate a scarce resource. So I see all the benefits of that. It focuses things on the best and highest use. And it also seems that markets that work best are markets that have the appropriate regulation to make sure the market works properly.
You bet.
With no regulation at all, we got monopolies and all of that. So the most important regulation, and potentially this groundwater management agency could be involved in that, is this determining, once people get an entitlement, there's going to, number one, there's going to be an incentive to try to make the entitlement as,
Of course.
as large as possible.
Yes.
And that's a dynamic tension with people saying, but what's the realistic sustainable yield? So we have to, so you need, we need sort of the proper regulation at that moment. But the more important regulation, I think, is once those entitlements are determined, is the allocation of the entitlement. Those rules need to be understandable, need to be rules that are not easily manipulated, and everybody has to have confidence in that process. So that's why I interrupted you when you said it's the national government that does that. So I would like to hear more. I appreciate this. I'd like to hear more about how those allocation rules get established
Yep.
so that the resource is genuinely protected and everybody has confidence. And we don't find ourselves, okay, so everybody's happy, we have lots of rain for quite some time, but all of a sudden we're in a period of drought. We're going to have potentially this room full when we say, because we've had difficulty already saying, we got to cut the allocation. Well, no, you know, it's just tremendous. We have to remove that from a political decision year after year where there's going to be enormous pressure put on people sitting on this board to not make that allocation, to not reduce that
I agree.
allocation. So do you have much information on the
Yeah, so-
allocation
so-
rules?
First of all, I want to reinforce your intuition. So some of the biggest threats to markets are, first of all, regulatory uncertainty and revocation threats. So this is to say, market participants need to know that the rules that we set up at the beginning of play are going to be the rules for good. And that means we have to nail down, we have to decide what is that allocation function, right? How do we decide based on groundwater levels, how much of your entitlement you are going to get? And I agree, the rules need to be set initially. Now, in terms of the actual size of the pie, and everyone wanted the biggest pie possible, the way that's usually been handled in markets is by having a ramp down period. We do this in carbon cap and trade in California, and this is done in water markets in California where these adjudications have been done, where you start high, and then over 10 years, you predictably cut those entitlements to whatever your ultimate sustainable yield is that you're trying to reach. And it gives actors time, predictable, first of all, planning horizon that they can count on, and it gives them time to implement the types of efficiencies that are needed to achieve
I
those
know you
goals.
have something else you want to say, but I want
Yeah.
to respond to that
Please,
one.
please.
I agree that a ramp down gives people time to adjust. But still, there's going to be enormous pressure to say what we're ramping down to. Everybody wants that number.
Yeah.
A lot of, not every, but there's going to be a lot of people who have an economic incentive to have that number be higher than what it sustainably should be.
So I actually think that the safe yield number, it's important because it's the ultimate objective is to get the basin within sustainable yield. But the truth is, it's like economic modeling, right? Hydrological modeling, knowing what the sustainable yield is going to give you pretty big error bars on what that final estimate is. I actually think that the formula that gives you a percentage of your entitlement is more important than what the sum of all the entitlements are, because I'll throw this out at you that there are two of the adjudicated basins actually the court had to go back in and reduce the estimated safe yield 10 years after the judgment, and two of them they had to increase it. And the reality is that if the formula is right, if we decide what the relationship should be between aquifer levels and allocations, then we don't need to move safe yield. It could be that everyone gets 110% of their entitlement.
I don't
every
disagree with
year.
you. That's why I started with my
Right.
questions about the allocation.
Yep.
But we should recognize that there will be economic incentive on
You bet.
trying to have that starting point.
Of
even,
course.
and that will have to be adjusted.
agree.
You said there was something else you
Oh, yeah,
wanted.
so the other threat to markets is cheating, right? Is actually pumping more than your allocation. And so that means that, number one, you have to have proper monitoring. So metering is a part of every single functioning water market. There are still some basins that allow self-reporting of metering like we do here. But it's truth where you can have anytime, anywhere inspections of those meters. And there's even tolerances set, 2% in one basin that I read, 5% in another basin for meters. And obviously, we're near the advent of electronic metering where the technology is available that all of this can happen electronically. Because every single irrigator in this, if we're talking about agricultural water users, their incentive is to know that every single other person is being monitored, right? Because that's going to secure the asset value of the water that they're entitled to.
Yeah, when you think about it, a cheater could actually cause everybody's entitlement to go down because if you have impacts and the model didn't predict them,
Sure.
you would say, oh, we've
You
got
bet.
to change the entitlement. Or change the sustainable yield.
Yeah.
Thank you. I guess, how does the market system incentivize the development of new resource?
Great
We have
que-
lots of areas where the groundwater isn't usable.
Right.
and it costs a bunch to treat it, to make it usable. How does the market accommodate that?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, most of these markets have two requirements. When you make so first of all, they have a metering requirement and they have a water quality. So you have to meter and report the volume of water you're extracting. You also have to take routine water quality measures. And anytime an offer of water is made, you report both the price that you're willing to sell and you report the quality of the water that's being made available. And that the market will value those things differently based on how it can be used. So I would offer the example of if you have a pumper out on the Oxnard Plain who is extracting groundwater, and they also have access to something like treated wastewater from the GREAT facility, obviously, if the water quality in the ground is very high, that might actually have a higher marginal value than recycled water because we place restrictions on how recycled water can be used. And so you might actually find a situation, this is a hypothetical situation, but you might find one where it's actually better for the irrigator might decide to take delivery of the treated recycled water and then actually pump and sell pure groundwater. And so you will actually move the quality of water to the place that water of various qualities is needed. And again, the economic incentive is the price that the market confers on that. You have to find someone who's willing to sell for a certain amount based on the volume and the quantity, and you need to find a person who's willing to pay that price. And you need infrastructure, and this is one other thing I wanted to mention in the case of Australia, is that originally, even though there was, you had the National Water Commission collecting data and also being the ultimate arbiters of disagreements in the water markets, you had basin-specific trading plans initially, and it was not until 10 years after the initiation of water trading that the infrastructure was built to move water between basins, and so that evolved over time. The economic incentives in Australia were so strong that infrastructure actually got developed, and these did not necessarily need to be bond issuances that happened. There was a private incentive for private investment to build infrastructure to move water, just like the $35 million infrastructure projects in Kern County.
And if I could,
Yeah.
I appreciate Director West's question. I didn't want to cut it off, but I'm just thinking in my head. So somebody may decide that it's worth it for them to start to desalinate their water.
Yeah,
because
in
it's more
fact-
quality, to do an OR treatment.
Yeah, in fact, I'm
Because-
told-
Because the price of water during a drought may go up to whatever, and it's now worth it for them to actually pump that water and sell it to somebody. That'll all take a little bit of time for
Yeah,
that to
and-
happen. But that strikes me, that's what I thought the answer would be to your question, which would be, as the price of water hits certain levels, infrastructure becomes a profitable investment for people.
In fact, I'm told that we can do brackish water desal for about $1,100 an acre foot. That's the cost of supply. And, if we don't have to drive far down the road to find water. In fact, East County, water is selling at more than $1,100 an acre foot already. If you had a market where if you produced water, you could go and offer it on the market, we'd be doing brackish water desal right now. The current price of water is high enough to support that, and even with private funds. I'd also hold up the Poseidon ocean desalinization plant down in Carlsbad. This is a $2 billion project that was funded by a private company. And so that's investment that was made because of market incentives. The reason those market incentives exist in San Diego is because San Diego is at the end of every single pipeline. So they have the most insecure water in California. And so they value the security of that alternate supply and are willing to pay a significant price for it. The other one I'm told is that just talking to different agencies around the county, I'm told that there is as much as 50,000 acre feet of potential alternate supply. About half of that is brackish water desal. The other half of that is expansion of output from the Great Water facility. And so 50,000 acre feet of alternate supply, to me, changes the game in Ventura County, or within the jurisdiction of the GMA.
Dave?
Matthew, you mentioned in part of your talk that a key part of Australia's program was the separation of water from land.
Yep.
And then another point you mentioned, I think it was the Scott River Valley, about it not being separated.
Yeah.
It's actually tied.
It's leasing, yeah.
And I've heard other talks where you've said
Yeah.
that it's ideal that they be separated.
Yeah.
How does Scott River make it work? And,
Well, so-
and I guess the bigger
Right.
part of my question is, what do you think the likelihood of California water law being changed to separate water from land.
Yeah, so I have a couple of responses. So first, the Scott Water Valley one, they do exclusively leasing. I mentioned there were other basins that only allow leasing. But it's important to realize in their case that the way they actually allocate water is an unusual one. They do it based on irrigated acres. So the adjudication the right is not in the form of how many acre feet you can pump from the groundwater basin or divert from the stream. It's actually the number of irrigated acres you're allowed to have, and they've capped the number of irrigated acres. And so there is not the possibility there to actually separate the ownership of water from the ownership of land. What I would argue, though, is that the greatest amount of flexibility creates the greatest amount of economic value. And so again, I would say there would be economic benefit from merely allowing leasing. That would give growers on the Oxnard Plain flexibility they don't currently have. But if you want to create the greatest amount of economic value, I would say separate the two. And you're going to do that implicitly in a way, because alternate forms of supply are going to be separate from the existing sustainable pool of water anyway. And that water, so you're going to effectively, you may have people leasing it every single year because they're trading different qualities of water. And if that's the case, why not just allow permanent transfers of that title?
I agree with your assessment, and it makes a lot of sense to me, but I think that's, in fact, the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
Is that separation.
Well, and I actually think that the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act provides the authority to GSAs to do this, to actually separate entitlement of water from land. And the specific language there is that it authorizes GSAs to conduct both permanent and temporary transfers. So that's direct language out of SGMA. It authorizes permanent and temporary transfers of water allocations. And so I think you have the authority under the existing legislation, conditional on the GSP being approved by the state.
Steve?
Just on that topic, do you know of anybody, and is it possible to have a hybrid system? In other words, where you say the entitlement is going to be based on some things, but one of the things that the entitlement is based on is just the number of acres of land that's owned.
Sure,
You could have a hybrid so that no land becomes stranded with no water.
Right.
But you have the flexibility, so that could also be
absolutely, yes. Yep. So you can establish a floor. What you're really doing is limiting the amount of water that any landowner can trade. But that's, again, you can do it on both ends. You can say you must maintain 1 acre foot per acre. You can't sell any more than that. You could also, on the other end, you can regulate how much someone can buy. Because I know one concern I've heard, the economist to me isn't that concerned about it, but I've heard people say, one powerful landowner is going to come in and buy up all the water and monopolize the market. That can be handled very simply with the rules of trading at the beginning. You can put a total cap on how much someone can buy, and you can put a cap on how much someone can sell.
But that's the kind of stuff that we really need to think carefully about when we establish your
So I will say, and again,
original rules.
I'll send you the report from the National Water Commission. The conclusion of the National Water Commission actually is that the more liberal the trade, the greater the economic benefit.
Sure.
Their experiment has been that having as few barriers as possible creates the greatest value. And in fact, one of the things that they prioritized in that report was the desire to create a flexible system that will allow innovations that we can't even think of now. Maybe there's water that's going to come online that we didn't even envision, and ways of trading water that we haven't thought of.
And land, to whatever extent a system may decide to have some of the entitlement based on the number of acres, that water could still be leased.
Yep.
It just couldn't be sold.
You bet.
Right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so this is all in the menu of options that other water markets provide us with.
Does anybody in the audience have a specific question they'd like to ask Matt? Yes, ma'am. You got to come up to the microphone because we got to get it into the system.
My question for Matthew is...
Lynn,
oh, sorry.
For the record, you got to tell us who you are.
Lynn Jensen, Ventura County CoLab. How do they allocate the environmental part, and how do you keep...
In Australia or in Canada?
Well, how would you do it here,
Yep.
considering the environmental,
Yep. Great question.
the EPA and all those kinds of things,
bet.
and lawsuits?
Yes, all right. So a few thoughts there. So first of all, in Australia, Again, they actually treat the environment as a public good. The cost is borne collectively by citizens. And the federal government set about purchasing title to 800,000 acre-feet of water. As an interesting corollary to that, in the Central Valley Project Improvement Act actually curtailed 800,000 acre-feet of extraction by irrigators and just set that aside. So we definitely have a different approach here in the United States. So what I would say is that, first of all, the type of cooperation you're going to see is more on the lines of the Scott River Water Trust and the Oregon Freshwater Trust, where concerned citizens now have access to secure additional water for environmental use. The National Marine Fisheries, if they have an ESA finding, we are still going to be limited by whatever those judgments are. Again, if they continue to cut diversions off the Santa Clara River, we just have to live with that. But I would argue that markets, again, give water users the greatest flexibility to absorb those changes as they come down. So again, if future diversions are cut, then this will give water users flexibility and create incentives to create the kind of alternative supply that might offset those environmental losses of water.
Anybody else in the audience have a question? Bob?
Robert Aranio, Crestview Mutual. In the initial setup and ramp up there where the allocations or entitlements were given to the former property owners to use the water, was there any consideration taken into efficiencies? I have a very different water use than Dave does. Or was it all given based upon historical and then everyone was cut a percentage amount, thereby harming someone that may already be extremely efficient, forcing them out of business?
So in this case, again, holding up the Australian model, there are no farm businesses that have attributed the loss of their business to cuts due to the allocation system. So again, it gave them, 90% of farmers think that this supports their viability. There is no doubt that in that initial allocation phase, the reason that 17 basins the 17 basins that do water markets in California, adjudicated basins, use historical allocation, either maximum extraction or average extraction, is because of the overlying rights, the existing California water law. And so all I would say is that that's the precedent in California because of the legal environment that we're in. And so I don't have, there is no doubt that people who made efficiency gains prior to the, in recent years maybe, still have to, that's going to be their historical allocation. But it does provide them the opportunity. It gives them title to that initial allocation. That's water that they own. And then they can go to the market to try and secure additional supply if that's needed.
Okay. Anybody else?
Two questions for you. Jeanette Lombardo, California Food and Agribusiness Advocates. Have you done a legal review with SGMA? Because I think what you're stating is not the intent of it. So before we spend a lot of time and energy there, I want to make sure we've done that work.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm an economist. I'm not an attorney.
Okay. So perhaps we could do that first. And the other thing is just for my own curiosity.
So I would just push back, Jeanette, that again, we definitely have legal precedent through the adjudication, the history of adjudications,
Okay.
to do exactly the kind of rights-based management that I'm advocating.
Okay. So it's just basically taking the unbundling of the water rights, which was done at the federal level in Australia, and moving it down.
Right, and which has been done at least 11 times in California adjudicated basins.
Okay. And how long does that take?
So actually, that's a great question. The left-hand column that you couldn't read actually had the adjudication duration. So if we went the hostile adjudication route, those adjudications have been done in as little as 1 year and in as many as 24.
Well, that's a good range. I mean, the water, rain,
Okay, and just as an agricultural advocate, I have to ask, when 63% of the farmers in Australia are selling their water, where do they get their food from?
Oh, yeah, so great question. So again, I mentioned that rice production went to zero during the most extreme year of the drought. And so low-value crops were fallowed first.
Okay.
High-value crops, so we're mostly a high-value crop county, but what we saw in Australia was that it's those low-value crops that had to be imported.
Okay.
But the high-value production, in particular the orchards, the trees, the long-lived species, were maintained during the dry years of the drought.
Okay, and so, I'll talk
And
later.
actually, and again, I will gladly share the National Water Commission report with you, because it actually offers a crop-specific assessment of the effect of water trading. There's dairy, there's, it's not crop-specific, but crop type, so there's dairy, orchards, commodity crops, and that sort of thing, so I'll gladly share that with you.
Okay, let me kind of jump in here. Thank you. Okay. Matt has given presentations to a variety of groups, and I will assume you'll continue to do that. So if folks in here have questions that you go, you need to write them down and find out at what point in time he's given a presentation. He's given it to Farm Bureau, he's given it to others, and he's learning how to run the audio-visual to get his PhD. I'm sure he'd be happy to discuss this more with you because he can put that down rather than
And if I can just comment that every time I've given a presentation, there's great questions that I think, oh, I need to know the answer to that. So I benefit from those questions.
Yeah. So we're helping Matt get his PhD, and we'll all be invited to the big ceremony. So if you have questions, Matt's been in and out of a bunch of these meetings. I appreciate you coming and talking to us about this issue. And I think that as we go forward, in my mind, I think we have multiple tracks going right now that have a huge amount of interplay with them to get this problem resolved. And I've asked Jeff to give another look at our process and our structure to do that. So thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you to the board.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to, if I may, item number 4.
Do we need to receive and file
Oh.
the administrative reports from the executive officer's report?
We can do the executive reports. Let's just do the whole executive officer report section now if you want.
Well, that's what was moved up, I thought.
Oh, I thought we just moved G up, but
Oh,
we
we
can
just
do all.
moved G up?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can do all of them now. I don't think anybody's going to have any objection to that. So anybody want to make a motion to receive and file the
So
executive
moved.
officer report?
So
Motion.
moved.
And motion a second.
Is there anything executive, or the administrative reports besides what's in writing here?
Nothing else.
Great.
Okay, a motion and a second. And you need a roll call on that one? I don't remember. Al? No. Okay, any objection? Okay, so ordered. All right, let's go then now to item number 4. Gerhard.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, board members, members of the audience. To a degree, I'm going to be also talking about economics here. We have a proposed resolution 2015-4, which is imposing a fee on groundwater extractions to fund the cost of our groundwater sustainability program. That's the title for the item. I have a short presentation for you. Feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. So, background, as you know, we have a current $6 per acre foot extraction pump charge, which was established by your board back in June of 2014 through Resolution 2014-2. As you know, we presented at the June meeting this year supporting materials of the revenue that we collect under the $6 acre foot is insufficient to fund the agency's operations. And as we also presented to you, without surcharges, penalties, and settlement revenues collected this year, in the past, and moving forward, we have a shortfall. Moving on further with some of the background information, we also presented information that the $6 acre foot extraction charge would not fund additional work to carry out our mandates and authorities under the under the Groundwater Sustainability Act, or SGMA. Also at the June meeting, the board approved the budget and work plan and directed staff to initiate the process to increase the pump charge to $10 per acre foot. So that's the reason we're here before you today. As you're probably aware, SGMA authorizes a groundwater sustainability agency to impose a fee on groundwater extractions to fund the cost of the groundwater sustainability program. And those include the preparation and development of a groundwater sustainability plan, caring for some of the program administrations, as well as carrying a minimum reserve forward. So today, we've prepared for your consideration proposed resolution 2015-4. Within that resolution, we've described the agency as a groundwater sustainability agency for the basins within the agency's boundaries, so not anything beyond that. I want to make that clear. It includes, within the resolution, the $6 per acre foot pump charge that's granted under the enabling legislation, so that's carried forward. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that the $6 does fund some of our programs, but does not produce enough revenue to adequately carry out our responsibilities as a GSA or exercise any additional powers and authorities granted under SGMA. The proposed resolution 2015-4 describes the agency's actions on June 24th, 2015, approving a fiscal year 2015-16 budget, which is attached, and we anticipate some incurring additional costs, including, as I mentioned earlier, development of the groundwater sustainability plan, assessment of any changing conditions that would warrant changing the plan or groundwater management objectives, any additional enforcement activities, compliance, public outreach, coordination with Department of Water Resource, and overall program administration. So moving on to discussion on the what we're calling the sustainability fee. The sustainability fee is proposed at $4 per acre foot. It would produce additional revenue of approximately $500,000. $4 times 125,000 acre feet. That's the average that we've used in previous budget assumptions. We anticipate incurring expenditures of $850,000 in development of our groundwater sustainability plan, which will include sustainable yield determination, and thus revenues generated by the fee will cover only a portion. So if you just look at the portion of the $4, it'll cover a great portion of that. Any remainder will be covered through our existing fund balance. The effective date is established to coincide with our semi-annual extraction statements to cover, as it is set in Emergency Ordinance E, July 1st to December 31st for our municipal and industrial operators, and August 1st to December 31st for our agricultural operators. And the purpose is to allow us to accurately calculate the groundwater extraction charges consistent with the reporting periods. I put this slide together so that it's understood. You'll see that within the budget sheet, there's an estimated total revenue of $1 million. Now, you might say, why isn't it $1,250,000 this fiscal year? Well, that's due to how we receive the revenue, pump charge revenue. So pump charges are essentially in the arrears. They're booked within a particular fiscal year, and thus you would have essentially a blend when you move your pump charges from one value to the next. So for example, we charge $6 per acre foot for the first reporting period, which was January 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2015. We receive that money in August, September, and that's when it's booked into our accounts. If your board approves a $10 per acre foot for the second reporting period, we would receive that in January of this year. The effect of that is that you get an $8 blended charge over the entire fiscal year. If you were to keep $10 into the 16-17 fiscal year, obviously you would have the benefit of the entire 10 over whatever extraction average pumping you would want to incur. So I just want to make that clear for everybody. In terms of public notice, we provided public notice on this proposed sustainability fee at 3 different occasions in September. It was published through the Ventura Star. We also provided this public notice on our website per the SGMA requirements. So in conclusion, per your board's direction back at the June meeting, we are seeking your approval today through the adoption of resolution 2015-4 to create a sustainability fee of $4 per acre foot. And in conjunction with that, We would also utilize a $6 per acre foot under existing authorities for a total of $10 per acre foot for each agency operator. And that revenue would be used to support the agency's groundwater sustainability activities and operations for this fiscal year. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Gene?
Gerhard, does the sustainability fee sunset when the development of the groundwater sustainability plan is fully paid for?
No, I don't believe so. Al, you can perhaps correct me on this?
Possibly. The plan, or the fee that's being proposed right now is to fund the plan development. Once the plan has been developed and approved, those expenses or those costs will no longer be incurred by the agency. But at that point, depending on the contents of the plan, there may be other costs that the agency will be, again, incurring in order to implement the plan. So,
No, I appreciate that, but
but-
I guess barring a separate action of the board, if the plan is created, adopted, and approved, and then paid for over time with these funds, and again, barring a separate resolution with respect to funding implementation, does this fee go away after those events?
it would go away if the agency could not support the continued collection of the fee. It would transition into other aspects of the program as the resolution is set up. It's not specific to funding the development of the plan.
So it wouldn't take any further action of the board for these funds to be diverted to some other sustainable groundwater use?
Correct, as long as those uses fall within the sustainability program that the board adopts.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? This is a continuation of the discussion we had back in June. If I recall, Dave, we had the fiscal committee look at these numbers as well. Anybody want to make a motion to adopt? Oh, I'm sorry, public? Anybody in the public? Okay. Any member would like to make a motion?
I'd be happy to make the motion and make a comment at the same time. I appreciate Director West's question about these fees. My experience on these agencies and stuff, it's much easier to reduce fees and cut fees than it is to increase them. We don't know what kind of responsibilities we're going to have, particularly if we have water markets in terms of trying to keep the rules of the game fair, et cetera. So I just think when we get to that point, whenever we get this plan finished, then we can look at this fee. I would point out that that we are doing something that I'm usually very uncomfortable with. We are running this agency, not ongoing expenses without matching them to ongoing revenue. We're actually dipping into fund balance. It's a decision we made. It's not sustainable in the long run if we continue to have that. So we're adopting that, and my intention would be that's because we're making a one-time, one-year decision adopting the fund balance, but we should revisit that and decide whether we are, whether that's, sustainable in the future. So with that, I'd make the motion to adopt staff's recommendation.
So that's to adopt Resolution 2015-04, correct? That's the resolution you want us to
Yes.
adopt?
I'm sorry, yes.
Recommendation.
Okay, so that's the motion. A second?
Second.
Okay, a motion, a second. Any other discussion? Jessica?
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchert?
Yes.
Okay, number 5, please.
So I have a Gerhard Hubner. Again, I'll be presenting this item. This item will be very short. This is the agency's revised fiscal year 2015-2016 budget. I'll bring the presentation. I'll jump right into it. Again, as you recall, June 24th meeting, presented this draft budget and work plan for the fiscal year. You voted to approve it as presented. You approved the policy recommendations of the fiscal committee, and you directed the staff to come back with the $10 per acre foot action. That being accomplished, this is a returning item as a companion to item number 4 with the revised fiscal 2016 budget worksheet that's attached as 5A, with the revenue line now reflecting the $10 per acre foot extraction charge. I also want to note that the spreadsheet has been revised from the version from from the June meeting with an updated fiscal year 2014-15 actuals. So in your item 3 today, under consent, you have the benefit of having the actuals, and so we were able to update that and include that with the budget spreadsheet that you have for this item. So that's the major change that you see today. You have an accurate starting fund balance, and with that, we have a recommendation for you today to adopt that revised fiscal year 2015-16 budget item to reflect the revenue amount.
Okay.
Of $10.
Any questions from any members? Any questions from anybody in the audience? Okay, anybody make a motion? Okay, in a second? Motion and a second to approve the 15-16 draft, the budget rather, as staff. Jessica?
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Before you begin item 6, may I make a comment?
Yes.
Boskovich's representative, Mr. Lemieux, was informed of the meeting, and it's my understanding that he agreed to the date. We heard from him yesterday. He won't be coming to the meeting to present their half of it, but they will be sending something written. So just for your information during your deliberations.
Okay. Okay, Kathleen and Al, we're going to hear an appeal about a request for a variance. In the past, you've had me swear in people and do all kinds of things. How do we do this? How do I swear in a letter if it's been received? Give me the format that you want me to follow. Yeah.
You don't. The board can receive and consider the letter and the information provided in the staff report, but there appear to be no witnesses that are going to present testimony, so.
All right, do I have to swear in Kathleen?
No.
No. Okay, Kathleen.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Kathleen Rydell, and I'm here to present item 6, Boscovich Farms appeal of executive officer's decision to deny the request for variance from the requirement to reduce extractions under Emergency Ordinance E. I'd like to start my presentation with going through the chronology. Boscovich Farms filed a variance request on November 5th, 2014. The agency notified them on February 19th that the request was denied. On March 17th, they asked that the variance request be reconsidered. And on April 3rd, Boscovich Farms filed an appeal of that variance request denial. On April 6th, the agency notified Boscovich Farms that the appeal request was received and that the date was set for the appeal hearing. And the next step was that Boscovich Farms sent a letter stating that they would like an interim allocation, and they paid the fee. Since that time, the original appeal hearing date was moved at their request, and so it was set for today. And they were notified upon requesting that change of date what the new date was, and that today was the date set. On August 27th, Boscovich Farms representatives met with agency staff and provided some water use data, which is included in the agenda packet. I have referenced there the item number, the item numbers, so you can see it wants to switch. Okay, and then on September 8th, they sent another letter clarifying their request for allocation. All of those letters are included in the agenda packet. So as background, their temporary extraction allocation was set at 487 acre-feet per year. Their request is for an allocation of 700 acre-feet per year, which is a 44% increase in their allocation. In the most recent letter of an interim allocation, they suggested that a 550 acre-foot per year allocation be granted. It would be temporary. They'd like to have it for 2015. They weren't sure, based on their extractions reported, what they find that they need. They would probably modify it, or suggested that they would want to modify that. Picture's a little stretched, but this is an aerial photograph. The Forebay Basin, they're within the Oxnard Plain. I have referenced there the 101 Freeway, Oxnard Boulevard, Rose Avenue, Highway 34, Pacific Coast Highway, and East Pleasant Valley Road. So you can see the approximate location of the Boscovich Farm facility. The Boscovich Farm facility, it's fruit and vegetable washing, packaging, shipping operation. The processes are subject to federal and federal regulations, food and safety guidelines, and regular government inspections. They have 2 wells on site. They are shown as green dots on the slide. One is active, one is inactive. They share the water with the power plant, so I will do this without trying to change the slide. There's the power plant, here's their facility, the 2 wells, one there, one there. And so they're sharing their water. Their adjusted historical allocation is 699 acre-feet prior to Emergency Ordinance E being adopted. The original data provided to the agency that we had on file were their reported extractions. So plotting their reported extractions, you can see the variation over time. Their temporary extraction allocation would be plotted at this level, 487 acre-feet per year. They're requesting an interim allocation of 550 acre-feet, but their desired allocation is 700 acre-feet per year. You can see that that is more water than was extracted since 2003, reported extractions. And you also added were the information provided by, in one of the letters, stating what regulations came into effect at what time. So you can see that in 2007, there was a food and safety guideline for leafy greens, and it goes on when things were adopted and implemented. So in August, they provided us a split between what is used for the Boscovich facility and how much water is provided to the electrical facility. And they're requesting the increased allocations because of their food safety guideline requirements, that they need additional allocations. So plotted in there is the blue line is Boscovich Farms use, the orange line is the power plant's use. You can see that the TEA is 487 acre-feet per year. 20% reduced is at this level at 390 acre-feet per year. And then you can see that this is undifferentiated water use. It wasn't split between the 2 facilities. They exceeded that 390, the 20% reduction that they're asked to be at in 2016. In 2013 and also at about 2007. Boscovich Farms, located in the Oxnard Plain, their facility is located at approximately this location, and you can see that in the upper aquifer system, they're within as of fall 2014, a 20-foot to 30-foot depression below sea level on the potentiometric surface. And for the lower aquifer system, fall of 2014, they're located on the contour that's approximately 40 feet below sea level. In conclusion, in reviewing Emergency Ordinance E and Article 2, the criteria for granting variances, We found that Boscovich Farm did not demonstrate that there are special circumstances or exceptional characteristics of the owner or operator which do not apply generally to comparable owners or operators in the same vicinity, or that the strict applications of the reductions will result in practical difficulties or unnecessary hardships inconsistent with the general purpose of the emergency ordinance, or that granting such a variance will result in no net detriment to the aquifer systems. So it is the recommendations of agency staff that the appeal be denied and that the temporary extraction allocation of 487.728 acre-feet per year remain, and that they be reduced per the schedule mandated in accordance with Emergency Ordinance E.
Okay. Members have any questions for staff?
I guess I do, and I'm not so sure it's a question for staff, but in reviewing this material, and I reviewed it very carefully, it appeared that Boscovich acknowledges that they waste their wash water into the Oxnard sewer system because it's commercially infeasible for them to treat that wash water and reuse it. I would have liked to have heard from them why it's commercially feasible for Oxnard to treat and reuse that water, but infeasible for Boscovich to do the same thing. I trust you never heard that answer because I never saw one in the packet.
In the meeting that we had with them, they stated that they were looking into it, but at this time it was not economically feasible or economically to their benefit to do that at this
That
time.
might go back to Matt's point that the price of water needs to go up. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have comments or questions? I also read through all of it, the staff's report. I went through, frankly, every letter that came from Boscovich and all the letters going back and forth. And I think as a staff, as in an agency, we did the correct job. We went through the process. They went through the process. I find nothing in here that would indicate that we shortchanged the process, that we didn't give them an opportunity to present their case. We had meetings with them. It's a lot of letters and comments going back and forth. But I think the fundamental thing that I walked away from was, just as you reported, it did not meet one of the tests or the tests that are in the ordinance. So my compliment to staff and to Boscovich for utilizing the process, but I would support staff's recommendation.
Do we have somebody bringing us a letter?
Is there a letter that we're supposed, we don't have a letter at this time? Okay. All right.
Somebody out there bringing it to us?
Okay, that's not happening. All right.
Just
So,
thought I'd ask.
yeah, very good. We have we've heard staff's presentation, we heard their motion, I'm open, or their recommendation. I'm open for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept the staff's recommendation to deny the appeal.
All right, Mr. Nash, very quick.
I'll second the motion.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm Steve Nash, Oxnard, and I just want to address why it's economically feasible for Oxnard to treat the Boscovich waste stream. That's because it's being heavily subsidized by the Oxnard ratepayers. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion to accept staff's recommendation and deny the appeal. Am I correct in what I just said? And a second to that motion. All right. Any other discussion? Jessica?
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchert?
Yes.
Okay, folks, unbelievably, it's 6 minutes before 3. We've never done this on a meeting date in a long time. So we're going to convene.
Dare I say when you were here to chair it?
Yeah, well, okay. Damn. Who invited her? This has got to stop. You told me you weren't going to be here, and you just told me you flew in from London last night just to be able to say that, didn't you? We're going to adjourn to closed session, and then after closed session, are we going to report out or not?
There may be a report out of
Okay,
closed session.
so we may report out, so we're not closing the meeting, we're not adjourning the board meeting, we're adjourning to closed session at this time. Okay? I'm missing, who am I? Okay, I'm calling the meeting back to order. We're back into open session. Council?
Yes, in closed session by a vote of 5-0, the board authorized the filing of legal action against C&F Flower Growers and its affiliates in connection with delinquent groundwater extraction charges for its facilities located at 5th and Hobson in the city of Oxnard and near the intersection of Olivas Park Drive and Victoria Avenue near the city of Ventura. And the action has also been authorized against the property owners at both those locations.
Okay, very
Will
good.
be identified.
All right, and with that, this board meeting is adjourned until October 28th, right? There we go.